anytime you're ready. But after, let me have a cup of that sip. Okay, anytime you're ready.
Welcome to Tripping on Legends. I'm Deanna Mulhern.
I'm Christopher Balzano.
This is your campfire in the crossroads. And this is episode
125.
Lost Cities, Lost Bones.
Lost Cities, Lost Bones. And it's an interesting episode. So if you've been listening lately, what we've kind of been doing is giving you, I think, a whole bunch of really cool legends, right? Like a whole bunch of legends. So it's kind of like you're listening, tripping on legends, you're getting a whole bunch of little stories, you're honoring the story, and then we slide in with the Florida one, right? Mm-hmm. Because really honestly, there's a lot in Florida, which I think is the spirit of the show. There's a lot in Florida that is just reflective of what other things are happening across the country, across the world, right?
Could have been in your town.
Could have been in your town. Most of these stories happen and can happen anywhere. And oftentimes, I'm driven by, I see something. Because no offense to you, but I'm the driving force. I'm the driving force of the show, right? So sometimes it's like, oh, I really want to, like we haven't been, I want to take Deanna out to the East Coast. What's something on the East Coast, right? And so I look for like places that we haven't been before, like parts of the state we haven't been before, and I try to find a legend.
You're trying to get away from middle Florida then?
Just trying to get, so that 75 doesn't become the sole pathway to the knowledge of tripping on legends. Okay. And also so that you can kind of get, different places, like different perspectives, and we would have never gone to like Boca Raton if I hadn't thought that way, right?
Right.
And so that's one way that I sometimes.
But the Ocala is so haunted.
Right. There are certain places that keep calling us back, right? They definitely do, and you always #follow the signs, go with those. Then other episodes, I see something that is maybe in another person's mind completely unrelated. And I go, what? Huh? Like that piques my interest. And all of a sudden I'm in a rabbit hole that somehow weirdly connects to.
Yeah, you do that like every day, I think.
That's my curse or my talent. I don't know which one it is.
It's a very common theme for you.
It is a common theme for me because half the posts that I put on our social media are, this is what I discovered when I was doing something else, or like,
even like
can't
your
believe I was
bookcase cleaning.
So I've been cleaning out my.
Supposed to do one thing.
I've been cleaning out my bookcases, trying to figure out how best to organize my brain via bookcases, like how they should work and be.
This could be an analogy.
And so, right, I should. I should actually film some of the bookcase
and send it to a therapist.
I was thinking make TikToks or something like that. Of like, what did I do? 0.5. But
this is bookcase number 2.
This is bookcase number 2. What do you think should be in bookcase number 2? Maybe we should put it out there, like the tour of the bookcases, to try to tour through my mind.
Yeah.
Because the spark of this for me was it popped up the story of Doveland, Wisconsin, and I was reading it, and I became like totally intrigued by this story of Doveland, and my brain started going pop, 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 pop. And I'm like, this should be a show, but I don't want to make it just an internet legend show or a digital legend show because I think that's something bigger. Mm-hmm. In other words, I think in this case, the digital legend is something that jumps off of the computer and is a hardcore reflection of older traditions.
Now it's digital, but it used to be.
Now it's right, and I think, in another sense, the digital legend of it is reflective.
Has an origin.
Of it. Like it's added this new way to make it faster and everything like that. So all the stuff we've talked about in past episodes and things like that. And I was like, well, what's a Florida connection to this though? Like, what can we take out of this? It's a legend trip. And then I remembered a very bizarre story that I've heard multiple times, and I was like, is this real? Is this true? Is this something that actually is out there? Or is it something that's borrowed because you only hear it at certain places? And that's that. There was a city in Lake Okeechobee that was either intentionally or unintentionally washed out.
What do you mean washed out?
Like, in other words, if you go into the depths of Lake Okeechobee, you're going to find an old city.
You mean in the water?
Like an old town.
Underwater?
Underwater.
So you mean washed out?
Like washed out, right?
But it's a lake. How could a lake? It's not like an ocean.
That it's an artificial lake, right? So just so you know, if you're listening to this episode and you're in your car and you're gripping your wheel tighter, being like, they're stupid right now, they're not talking about the right thing, I want you to understand that I'm telling, what we're doing now is we're reflecting what is out there, not what is the truth. We'll get to the truth.
Okay.
All right? But I remember hearing that there was a city or a town that for one reason or another was intentionally downed by Lake Okeechobee.
Okay. Because they needed a lake there and it was in the way?
I couldn't remember why they said it had been done. And you know, like, there are other places like that, right? Like, I think famously, and I can't remember the name of the town because I was so focused on other stuff. But
Florida?
There's that.
What about Florida?
We'll talk about that. Trust us. We're going to get to Lorena. But there's that one in California. And the only reason why I know it...
Italy, the volcano?
I think that's slightly different. That would be volcanic ash as opposed to water. No, there's a town, and maybe someone in the chat room can help. And if you ever want to be in the chat room, feel free to follow us on social media, especially facebook.com/Tripping on Legends, and then IGTV at Spooky Tripping to get in on conversations like when we actually go live on shows. But all I know is that it's the one, so it's got to be in Vallejo County, I think, maybe, that it's in the Zodiac Killer killed the couple on the blanket.
Okay.
Do you know the Zodiac Killer at all?
You didn't do a show on that.
On the Zodiac? Of course not. I'm scared crapless of the Zodiac.
So why would I know? If you
I just thought maybe you knew about, true crime. But there's a lake in California that they do that, so there's an entire lake that's an artificial. Anyway, I thought I had heard by multiple sources telling me, and if you go online and you check really fast, you'll see headlines like this whole thing right here is tonight's research. Is this folder thick enough for you? There's a whole, if you go look at search engines and you look at this, that say things like Okeechobee Lost City. Like there's a city under the, and it's presents it as if it's another Atlantis.
Right.
Or for one reason or another, something happened to Lake Okeechobee, and some of them present it as this Okeechobee is an artificial lake, and others present it as in that it's like Okeechobee overcame this town, and now the town is underneath the water.
It sounds like a movie.
It does sound like a movie, and a good movie at that, except for the fact that that is 100% not true. There's no city underneath Lake Okeechobee.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe underneath centuries, if not thousands of years of mud and dirt, there's something. Maybe Lake Okeechobee, for one reason or another, is a burial mound or a burial site.
Mm-hmm.
Or
like
maybe,
a lot of places.
Or maybe something disastrous happened.
Okay.
It's a really big mystery, and it's a mystery that I think is built on fallacies. It's built on misconceptions, and it's built on this idea that there is something mythical about that body of water.
Lake Okeechobee?
Lake Okeechobee. So why don't we start just by throwing out some stuff? What do you know? What do you know about Lake Okeechobee? Do you know anything about?
Okay, so when I first moved to Florida,
I was fascinated by it. So
I am from New England, so I'm familiar with the beautiful lakes of New Hampshire, Vermont. So what's like a New Hampshire?
Lake Winnipesaukee?
Yeah. So
Newfound Lake?
We were in we were on the East Coast, and I was like, oh, let's go to Lake Okeechobee. It's going to be this beautiful Winnipesaukee, I just imagined boats and
Right.
summertime in New Hampshire. So we drove to Lake Okeechobee, and it's not a beautiful lake.
It's not? I've never been.
No.
Like, I've been to Okeechobee Library, which I'll get to. But
the
like,
guy in the gas station was like, "You drove from West Palm to Lake Okeechobee." I'm like, "Yeah, we wanted to go to a lake. We've already been to the ocean, thinking it was this beautiful lake." It was like a canal. It looked like a water treatment plant or something.
Like a water, and okay, so
there's no boats.
and that's the interesting part.
And it smelled weird.
Is that Lake Okeechobee is like the crossroads of the water of this state.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time looking at what exactly is Lake Okeechobee in terms of like in the environment, what does it do?
Right.
And I found a lot of conflicting information, and then a lot of information that said it used to be this, but it was this. But basically, we think of it this way: like it feeds and gets from the Everglades, and kind of controls all of the water in the central part of the state. Right, like everything,
that's what I felt like. It was
everything at one
treatment.
time or another goes through Okeechobee or has an Okeechobee kiss to it. But would it amaze you to realize that it's only like at its deepest in an average rain season? It's only 15 feet deep.
That's what I mean. It looked like
You know what I'm saying? It's insane.
we had to climb up like a cement barrier to peek at it, and it was like,
If you're we'll talk about the cement barrier. If you are not from Florida, and so the lake, like what Lake Okeechobee is just totally baffling to you. You know nothing about it. You're like, why do they keep throwing up this word as if it's unavoidable where we live, right? Like you hear the name,
Yeah,
you know
it's
it's there.
Well,
Before I ever
the
came
name
to
is big.
Florida, it is. I'm really good at spelling it now, by the way. It is the second largest.
"Gee, about this."
The second largest freshwater body of water in the United States, in the continental United States.
Oh, it doesn't seem that big.
I don't even know why you would say that. You see it from friggin' space, right? So if you are not in Florida, you've never been to Florida, look at a map, look at next time, like you're watching the news
been
and they're
there
showing the
twice.
weather, there seems to be a big hole in like the center of Florida, but like a little bit down. That's Lake Okeechobee.
I'm gonna
It's
look it
so
up.
big, when you look at a map, it looks as if someone like punched a hole in the
But
state.
there's no swimming or boats or anything on it.
It's primarily, it seems it's primarily a fishing type lake. Like I haven't heard, and I think I was talking to someone. They said, "Oh yeah, you don't do things on Lake Okeechobee
No.
except for fish."
Yeah.
I'm not going to confirm that because some people might do stuff like that. It's 730 square feet. It's 500,000 acres, 135 miles of shoreline. So think about that for a
That is
second.
big.
135 miles of shoreline. Technically it's in the counties of Glade, Okeechobee, Martin, Palm Beach, Hendrick, and they all kind of like meet in the center, right? So they all kind of have this.
Unless
So
I went
it's-
to the wrong part.
it really is this center of the universe of Florida. And as we were saying, the water table in Florida is hugely impacted by whatever's going on in Okeechobee. And it rises and falls the way Florida rises and falls. And there's a lot of legislation and stuff, and some people were saying, after a certain storm, like this happened, and so the water changed. I was like, okay, I am not an expert in water. I can admit when I'm totally baffled by what something is saying to me. I can't possibly learn everything. So I can only go by like,
I don't know,
all
it's the
right.
watershed of Florida.
So I can like fall back on that stupid thing of like, yeah, there's the water does stuff to other water. There you go. Beautiful. I'll leave it at that. Like that's about as much as far as I can take it. But this underwater city idea kept popping back in my head.
Seems like there could be a city.
Right, like it makes sense, right? And you've heard these stories of cities that are underneath bodies of water, and I always remember the one in California from mainly from the movie Zodiac. But I know there's other places like that where they've built the city and then they, for whatever reasons, have to be washed out or there was a disaster. And then I started doing research and finding different things out about the history of Lake Okeechobee. One of the things, so I want to build it up as whatever we feel about it, like whatever we know about, whatever the facts are, there seems to be something mythical about it. In terms of, there are old legends about how it was formed. And one of these legends talks about the fact that these two brothers were the most amazing hunters. And every day they went out, every day they caught stuff, and they were going through a really, really cold streak, right? And they weren't bringing back any fish, they weren't bringing back any animals, and like their family would start to be concerned. And these two brothers, they were like late teens, like early 20s, they said, like, we have to go further, we have to go further. And the mom was like, that's fine, just don't go into this one area, which is where Lake Okeechobee is now. And so they went in, and the animals were weird. That's all it says. Like, the animals, there was something not quite right about them, and they found this little pond. And they decided to fish in the pond, and one brother was like, no, dude, there's something weird about the pond, I'm not going in, I'm not going to fish out there. And the other brother cast his line, and he immediately caught a fish.
Right.
And he was like, this is cool, look at this, and he's holding it. And the other brother's like, it was almost as if the brother who caught the fish was under a trance. And he's like, don't eat that fish, there's something wrong with it. And he's like, what are you, crazy? And he started eating it, he didn't even cook it. He's like, bit the head off and was like eating it. And it was like, what's going on? Like, there's something wrong with it. And he's like, you're crazy, it's the best fish I ever had. And then he finishes the whole fish. And then he looks at his brother, and his eyes kind of like start to twitter. And he's like this. And then he says, there's something wrong with me. Oh, there's something wrong with my stomach. And he's like, go get help. And so he runs, and he goes and gets the entire village. And by the time they come back, that brother has turned into a gigantic snake, right? And so he's a snake, but he still kind of has like the humanity in his eyes. He's saying, brother. He's kind of calling out to him. And he's like, no, Woody, I told you not to eat it. And the brother starts swimming like in circles and circles and circles. And every time he does another lap, the pond gets bigger, and the pond gets bigger, and the pond gets bigger, until the brother's totally freaking out, and he's swimming all over the place, and faster and faster and faster and faster. And then he slithers off, and the brother's never seen again. But Lake Okeechobee is left. And so there's something weird about that river. It has a supernatural origin, and there's something not quite right about the fish and the animals that are around it. And I guess that lake, or that becomes the Kissimmee River. And then the where he was like running around and riding around is Lake Okeechobee. And so you're not supposed to go there. It's like there was a very specific, not supposed to go there. And then like the first Spaniards that came here, and there's an account of this one who was captured by the Calusa, and the Calusa talked about it in like hushed tones and like reverent tones to this guy.
Okay.
Like he would overhear these conversations. He said, "What are you talking about?" And they were like, "There's this great lake, and da 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 da, and you're not supposed to go there. And it's cursed somehow." But it was never really like it was cursed. It was just more of like there was something just off about it, and they didn't speak about it. So if you don't know the Calusa are fishermen, right? They're hunters. They are. Is it safe to say? Do you know about the Calusa? You're a school teacher. The Calusa are like the badasses of the Southern Native Americans. Yeah. Right? Like right. But like the Calusa were the ones that like when the Spanish came, the Calusa immediately fought them. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like it was they weren't like those. No, we have a balance with nature. These are new people. What do they want? Like, let's talk to them. They were like, warriors. Right, like they were like hardcore. And so for them to be protective. kind of very protective and like, don't go there, don't go there, has like this kind of, it adds to the right, because
they would go anywhere.
Because they would go anywhere, they would do anything. And they called, the Calusa called it Miami. Like spelled, like spelled completely different, but essentially pronouncing it almost near to the word Miami.
Really?
And then when the Spanish first started to come, they would call it like a water of the Holy Ghost or laguna. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it.
So where did this Okeechobee come from?
Okeechobee is a Seminole word, which means big water. You didn't think I knew that, did you?
I knew you knew
Okay,
that.
yes, and that's like the first thing everyone always, of course, every entry about Lake Okeechobee has to say, Lake Okeechobee, which is seminal for big water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there all the time. And I was like, oh shoot, did I write it down? I'm like, yeah, I wrote it down right there. It's right there. It digs into this history of, is it a fear we have? That our town is going to go away. Right? That societies have been wiped out before.
Is there more Florida towns that have gone away than other places?
Well, I mean, just think about tripping on legends. Like you were just, I think, halfway joking when you said it, right?
Yeah.
But we have Laredo, Florida.
Yeah.
We have.
No, it seems like there's a lot
we have
of ghost
Coon Hill,
towns
right? We have all these. I always talk about. If you've ever seen my presentations, I always talk about. To me, Central Florida is not Central Florida laterally. It's Central Florida vertically, right? Because once you get off of the water, once you get off of the ocean. Those towns, and we're going to talk a little bit about why, those towns, they go away. And it's not like New England where we were, where it was like, oh, people are gone away, well, let's go build there again, and we'll call it something different. Instead, there are many towns, and this fits into, remember we were talking about abandoned stairs and structures, that there are towns that go all throughout that Central Florida area,
Like
that just abandoned, right? Like we talked about Coon Hill, if you want to look at our episode in our archives about the Humpty Dumpty haunting, where they just were like, you know what? Let's just take all of the wood and go someplace different and build someplace different because our town falls for one reason or another, right? Or we have, how many towns were named Cooper throughout the years here in Florida? And then, of course, that's not even getting into this entire list right here, which all essentially become ghost towns and abandoned towns after the events that we're going to talk about. So after 1928, all of these towns go away almost instantly.
Wow.
But we'll get to that.
It's a lot of towns.
It is. And I
Do
think
other
so.
states have that though?
I think it's
Unique to Florida?
I don't think it's unique to Florida. But
Florida?
I think that it's the right conditions have to occur. And part of those conditions are places that you can't regularly get to.
Yeah.
Right? If a town fails, like the businesses go under.
There's no travel.
Right? But like, you know it's there, right? And maybe someone else settles it, or all of a sudden a highway gets built, and so you go through that town, and, right? And then because of, excuse me, something recognizable or something you remember, the town has a life even after it goes away, and then it becomes something different. So it's like, oh, this town used to be, some British name usually, right? Like Johnston Mills, and now it's called, Andover. That's not actually what Andover used to be called. So I don't want calls and emails on that. But I think we always, whether it's because of the flood, right? Like all these flood stories where everything gets wiped out, that are in so many different civilizations, Christianity, Judaism, Egyptian ones had these stories of floods. I think we have this like tentative relationship, like we're going to get wiped out, like we're going to get washed over.
The water is kind of like healing too. To get rid of the town, it's like flush it out.
Well, it's not for the people underneath the water.
No, I know, but like after.
Yeah, and if you think right, because it's like that's purifying, and all those
purifying.
And all the folklore, the mythology behind all those stories is a purifying moment in history, right, where this happens.
There was some evil.
There was an evil that needed to be cleared out. Even ice ages are like that, right? But what about modern times? Like a town should not, for all intents and purposes, Laredo, Florida is a ghost town. But we know it. It has a name, right? Like, we can identify it. What got me started on this path were these different towns, these different rural, they're almost all rural, right? So that's going to be a common theme, that just disappeared. And why the hell did they disappear? Right? So there are places where people live.
Can we just say?
There are places where people...
Nobody's traveling through it. There's not known for anything. We already know the answer.
Except for the fact these are all in modern times.
After
In modern times, there should be some history. right? So
you're saying there's no record.
There's no records of them either.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, like, we talk about. I just decided to write them. We've talked time and time again. It's the major thing I'm working on right now is about Pemberton Ferry and how, because of a fire, so many records of Pemberton Ferry are lost. But that's still 150 years ago, right? That's still quite a ways away. That it was founded and it had its kind of heyday, if you will. Whereas some of these are extremely modern. So I thought we would take a little tour across the United States.
I'm like, what is extremely modern?
I'm glad you asked. How about 1928?
I wouldn't say that's extreme.
I would say that's enough that there should be pictures, that there should be records, there should be.
Okay.
It's hilarious, by the way. I'm just going to throw this in there since it was hilarious. We were doing the Gettysburg Address last week, and I was talking, and one of my students the next day after the first day we worked on it said, "I don't think this is as important as you think it is." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "I was searching all night for a video of Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address, and I could not find one."
Oh my gosh.
So 1928, according to... let's travel to the fine state of Iowa.
1928 could be like silent pictures.
It's
right.
Actually, I think
Talkies.
I think talkies were around by then.
Just came out.
Let's talk about Urkhammer, Iowa.
Okay.
What a great name, Urkhammer, right? A lot of this stuff comes from Obscure Legend Wiki. So it's going to be weird if the source for a lot of this stuff and the stuff that's borrowed from it comes from Obscure Legends Wiki.
Is this something you use often?
It's something I'm going to use often now because it is an amazing site. This one sounds like it might be some kind of time slip or like a portal dimension shift. So this town in Iowa, and I would say rural Iowa, but isn't all of Iowa rural? I'm trying to think of in 2013.
I don't know, Boise? Oh no, that's Idaho. Iowa.
Boise,
What's the
Iowa.
Capital of Iowa?
Iowa City.
No, it isn't.
No? I don't know. I mean, they have universities and stuff, but we don't want to isolate people from the Midwest, so we're going to go on. This started first appearing online at a website called Strange States, right, by a guy named Cullen Hudson, and it was framed like it was an official history. So what we're going to find out with a lot of these is their first birth are on either strange websites or websites like Creepypasta or 4chan or Reddit, because before 2015, no one had ever heard of Urkhammer.
Okay.
Except this person, Cullen Hudson, not his real name, he posted this official history, right? Like someone posted an official history written by Cullen. I'm glad you asked. We'll get to that. By Cullen Hudson, which was essentially like, hey, listen, has anyone ever heard of this city? Like, I found this really weird reference by this guy who wrote it, and here's all this weird stuff that happened there. Has anyone ever heard of this?
Or anything?
No, Cullen was the person who wrote the history of this, right? So from 1920 to 1938, it was all good, right? It was a rural town, but they traded outside the town. Everything was good. In 1928, they flew over, and the aerial pictures showed fields, it showed pastures, right? And then in 1938, the same thing, they flew over, and there was nothing, right? The pastures were still there, the fields were still there, but they were unmanned, like they were
Who flew over?
Planes, like they were taking aerial pictures.
Okay.
Like when they take aerial pictures of the area. Now here's a weird thing. In the mid-1930s, there's a report. This is what this guy reports. A guy's driving through the town, and he stops at a gas station in Urkhammer.
Okay.
Right? So this guy is writing like, it was really weird. Like, they took pictures from the air, and they couldn't see anything, even though everyone knew the town was there. This guy was driving through the town. He stops for gas, right? He gets a little bit outside of what is known as the city limits, and his tank dies. And he looks, and his tank is empty. And he's like, I literally just filled up at that gas station, right? So he starts walking back to the town, hoping that he can get like a ride back, or so he can fill up his tank, or something weird is going on. And there was a sign, and the sign said, like, Urkhammer, like, 2 miles or whatever. And so he's walking, and he walked for a little bit, and then all of a sudden he saw a sign, and he looked up and said, Urkhammer 2 miles. He was like,
oh, say again?
you're right. And so he keeps walking a little bit more, and he sees the sign, Urkhammer 2 miles.
Oh my gosh.
And no matter how far he walked, no matter how long he walked, he could not get any closer to the town. No matter what happened, every time he walked, even though the scenery as he was walking was different, he would not get any closer to the town. Eventually he was picked up. They drove through the town. They couldn't find anything. It was like a straight road. The town didn't even exist. And the guy eventually went insane. In 1929, there was an article in the Davenport Sun-Telegraph, which it includes complaints from the residents of Urkhammer, and it basically says, "We want you guys to stop talking bad about our town, right?
Okay.
Like, there's nothing wrong with our town. Our town is here."
Wait, where were they complaining?
They were to the Davenport Sun-Telegraph,
And that's
which
the
was a
city,
newspaper,
like,
Davenport,
close to
Iowa.
them?
So it was a city that was close to them, like a bigger city that was close to them.
Okay.
Only problem is, as soon as they published those articles, the newspaper, the building where the newspaper was housed or whatever, burnt down to the ground, and the business went under. Never to be heard from again. Like the paper just completely went out of publication after it published those. I did a lot of research. There has never been a Davenport Sun-Telegraph. There's never been.
Okay.
Right? So there are no, it's not like you can go to newspapers.com or ancestry.com and you can look up articles in the Davenport Sun-Telegraph. But that aspect of the story of saying, like, there was a newspaper article and they had specific quotes from the residents of Urkhammer in there, never existed. Right? In 1932, Illinois family from Dust Bowl, California, right? So they were suffering from the Dust Bowl. They went to California to try to, like, grapes of wrath kind of shit, like try to make their fortune. They came back. Their names were, these are great, right? Tell me if you're going to make up names for a story, these are the names you make up. Palooka Bankforth and Tributation Escalantes. Those were the names of these two guys who were part of this traveling people going back across the country, having failed in California. They find a shop. They land in Urkhammer. They find this shop. There's a stairs leading to the door of this, like, house, and every time they tried to step on the steps, their foot would just go.
But they were in Urkhammer, yeah.
They were in Urkhammer.
Okay.
They would step, and they couldn't step into the. They would, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, their foot would go through as if it didn't exist, like if they, like a ghost trying to reach for a handle. Right. So they're like, okay, well, all right. It just, so then they, like, got these boards. And they're like, okay, rather than do these stairs to get to the door, we're going to build a ramp. So they put the ramp on, and then they couldn't step on the ramp afterwards.
Wow.
Like, they couldn't, like, they touched the wood. They literally moved the wood to the door, and they couldn't. And then there were a whole bunch of other unreported things, right? So because it was so small, they went to complain about it to the next town over, right? So the next town over, the sheriff, right? And they're like, okay, well, we'll meet you there. They went there. They went to the police station that was there, and they tried to open the door, and their hands.
In the next town?
The next town. Like, no, like the next town's sheriffs came over.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
To see, like, well, something weird is going on, and they couldn't open the door to the other police station because their hands were just going through.
Ooh.
May 7th, 1932, Fenelius Bumph reports that the town is completely gone. Right? There was a story, gypsies later were saturated with tears of the disappointment and the deep despair of those who were never born. They felt that. They tried to camp, like, right outside of it. There was no reports of it ever. It's been washed away completely from history, but the story has been repeated and repeated and repeated.
So it's right next to another town.
Right.
So can you research, like, the other town's records, or you know what I mean? Like, do they have football games against the town, or like?
Yeah, I like what you think.
Did you have a school?
Nope.
Like, records from
Urkhammer has never existed. It's on no maps whatsoever. right? It has no, there's no connection to anyone. No one was born in
Cullen
Urkhammer.
just made it up.
No one remembers. No one knows this Cullen guy and like where he got his research for it. No one can find any trace of it before that 2015 post
So it's all
about
fake.
how have you heard of it. Well, and here's what we're gonna discover tonight: is fake. So the most cynical part of us would be it is 100%. If you post something on Creepypasta, right? One of the websites that these things were posted to, like it's a message board. Their motto is "It's real while you're here."
Mm-hmm.
Here's like we're obviously
people
setting
say,
it
like
up.
it's real to you.
Right.
Like you're scared of heights. Like
Well, this is more of like when
real.
you are in this world, it's 100% real. Like people ask me all the time, "Well, are these ghost stories real?" And I'm like,
does it matter?
it has a life, right? So it has a life, so it's real. Are you asking me whether it's a ghost or different question? So, however often you can point, just like Slender Man or something like that, however often you can point to the fact that, dude, everything says that this is not real, there's still a portion of people that are still talking about it and that say, well, is it that? Or is it just from another dimension? Right?
Oh, that's what you were saying about the time.
Exactly. There's a very slim amount of time that Urkhammer appears on the records. Like this 10-year period, is it that we could only see it for 10 years?
Well, and it wasn't just this
Is it that was a time slip? Are we in a different alternate universe? Or
you had information not just from the one guy?
everything, which is another theme you're going to find tonight, usually all this stuff can be boiled down to one source that then you have to question that source. So it would seem as if clear-cut case of someone posted something interesting and got a lot of traction, right? Because all those websites and everything we're going to talk about, and all those websites, they hit it, and then there's a ton of comments. And sometimes those comments are, no, that's a totally real place. I was there, my uncle went there. When we get to Doveland, you're going to be like, people say, like, no, I remember buying a cup or seeing a cup from a friend that had Doveland, Wisconsin on it, and it doesn't exist, right? So it's a case, I'm waiting for someone to say it, whether it's someone in the chat room or you itself, to say this keyword, but we'll wait to see if anyone else says it. Because we're going to travel slightly to Kansas. Have you ever been to Kansas? I've never been anywhere near any of these places. As I was going through some of this, I wondered, like, does the Wizard of Oz actually have an impact on this story? Like, it's because there's a lot of elements to it that are weird, right? Because when you say
Kansas, that's the first thing. If you're not from Kansas, you probably think of.
A lot of my sources on this came from my Bible notes, but this was originally posted on Creepypasta, and then almost instantly, like the same place, like obviously it was the same poster, posted it on the Reddit subreddit No Sleep, and that would be Ashely, Kansas. Right? Ashely, Kansas. So I feel like this one, all right, now maybe, okay, Ashely, that makes a lot more sense than Urkhammer. Like Urkhammer, you have to start thinking, or hey, were these people from Germany originally or something?
Yeah,
but Ashely, it's like, okay, Ashely, I can hold on to that, right?
Yeah.
It had more than 670 residents, but it disappeared after an incident in 1952.
Whoa.
So
that's more modern.
Very close, right? Very close to our life.
Yeah,
there was an earthquake.
Were your parents
the earthquake? I'm talking about these elements. There was an earthquake. Those earthquakes caused a sinkhole. That sinkhole swallowed the entire city.
Okay. I believe it.
Much like the Mothman, and the events of Point Pleasant, there seemed to be like a lot of really weird things that led up to this, right? There was nothing weird. It was just a small rural town in Kansas. I'm not sure how 670 people matches up in 1952 to other towns in the area. Like, it wasn't huge. It didn't have its own police department.
But it's out there, so I would think.
Right. So a lot of this comes from the Hayes Police Department, which is a real place. Hayes is a real place. And these were called into supposedly, these were called into the Hayes Police Department. And they have records of some of this stuff, although those records can no longer be found. And we'll talk about maybe why. On August 8th, so this is all taking place in 1952. August 8th, a small black opening appeared in the sky. right? Like people, and literally dozens of people were calling it into the police
Like
that
a
there
Twister?
was no,
Twister
like
coming.
just an 8 a.m., 8 a.m. That there was just an opening in the sky that appeared, and it was like they thought it was like the second coming. You know what I'm saying? They thought it was like Armageddon or something like that. There was just this huge opening
really happened.
or opening in the sky.
Okay.
You can't. You have to stop asking that when it really happened.
No, like there's
and
records
recording part.
from the police department. You said.
There are no. Well, okay, we'll get to that.
Okay.
August 9th, right? A guy very similar to the Urkhammer. A guy was trying to drive to Ashely, and every time he was getting close to the edge of the city, all of a sudden he would appear on the other side. And he'd be like, well, wait a minute, I just, like, how did I get through the city? Like, what is going on here? And he would turn around, and he would go from the other way, and boom, he would automatically be on the road on the other way.
Some sort of, like, time travel.
And so, right, like some kind of time slip, right?
Yeah.
Each time he was about to enter, he was back in haste. Like, he would just be coming back, and then he calls the cops. Because he's like, he's freaking out, maybe there's something weird going on. We're talking 1952, so some of this stuff, in both of the next two stories, a lot of the stuff has to do with the Soviet Union and the communists in America, like, you know, and so he's thinking something weird is going on. Is it a communist plot, right? And so he calls in the cops get in the same loop. No matter how much the cops from Hayes try that day, August 9th, they cannot enter Hayes. They cannot enter Ashely. Every time they try, they end up in another part of the area, seemingly having driven through. But the reports from Ashely were the opposite. So people were calling the Hayes Police Department from Ashely saying, we keep trying to leave, and every time we try to leave, we end up back on the other side of the town, driving in the same direction. So no one could enter the town, no one could leave the town. And then one family said, that's it, we're finally going to break it. And they drove, and they drove, and they drove, and they were never seen again.
This is like alien stuff.
Isn't it? Like, this reminds me of every episode. I should be wearing my Fringe shirt, or like my X-Files. I don't have an X-Files shirt. But my Fringe shirt, but it is Bad Robot. So Bad Robot is, you know, Fringe is from Bad Robot. So August 10th. So now it's the next day. So first 8th, 9th, 10th. The sun never rose. The entire day, the sun never came up. And
just in Ashely.
And just in Ashely, and people who were outside of Ashely could not see into the city. Right? It doesn't report what they saw, like if they saw a black void or something like that, but that's the town itself. Like, so if you imagine, if you're driving along a road, you see like the houses, you see the outline of like Main Street or whatever, and they could not see the outlines of anything in the town of Ashely. It was just like as if it didn't exist, as if it had never been built. Like they could see through it. August 11th. A woman reported her daughter. A man reported that her daughter was talking to her father. So I'm sorry, a woman reported that her daughter was talking to her father, like having a conversation with her father. Her father had been dead for 3 years. And the father was saying very specific things that like the daughter wouldn't know because she was young, unless like someone was telling her these things. And she kept saying, "Daddy wants me to join him. Daddy wants me to join him."
Wow.
And so she calls up the department. She calls the police department. She's telling the police department about this for some reason.
What do you want us to do?
Right. They're like, "What the hell do you want us to do?" And you know why we can't do anything? Because we got 329 other calls with the exact same thing from residents of Ashely that day. It seemed as if little kids were talking to their dead parents. August 12th. Now, Ashely at that time, as a town, has 217 kids.
Okay.
Every single kid disappears.
What?
Right? So obviously they're getting frantic calls. Over 400 phone calls were made to the Hayes Police Department about these kids that were missing. They didn't know where they were. They all seemed to vanish at the same time. And they didn't know what to, like, Hayes didn't know what to do. So they said, like, do not leave the house. Do not go anywhere. Just stay completely inside. Like, don't go anywhere. And so no one ever looked for these missing kids. August 13th, an elderly man by the name of Scott Luntz reported a fire. But the problem was that the fire was coming down from the sky, right? And so he's literally looking down at the sky, right? So rather than something being on fire, the fire is coming down from the sky and kind of dissipating before it actually hits the ground. So it's like the entire sky eventually ends up being this huge flame and then disappears, like goes away, and then comes back again like several times over the course of the day. He said that it eventually was as bright as the sun. On August 15th,
My gosh, it's like never ending.
well, these are all leading up to the big event, right?
Oh my
On
gosh.
August 15th, a mom gets a phone call. So they actually have the 911 transmission, like the transcript of it.
Uh-huh.
The mom is quoted at the very beginning of the 911 transcript as saying, "They've all come back. They've all come back. They came from the fire."
Oh my gosh.
Right? And so in this recording, you hear, right? You can hear the voices of eventually, this woman screaming, eventually of a little child in the background saying, "We're much better now. We're all good. Come with us. Come with us. Come with us." And it goes on for 5 or 6 minutes before the call finally cuts out. And it was really crazy because as I'm reading the transcript of this, it just sounds like Pet Cemetery. You know what I'm saying? Like this whole sometimes they come back kind of idea of we're better now, but we're different. Until boom! August 17th, 1952, there is a 7.9 earthquake, and Ashely's the epicenter. And it is felt all throughout the Midwest, right? When the police arrive, the earth all around it, and 1,000 yards from the center, it was 1,000 yards by 500 yards, like this fissure, which I couldn't really understand what a fissure was, but it seemed to be like a sucking thing.
Okay.
By the way, if you're listening to this...
this is a sinkhole.
Yeah, this is the sinkhole type thing. Okay. If you're listening to this, please don't look up that word. Or if you look at that word,
now they're gonna
be careful of be careful of any other keywords that fall in before you put that word. A lot like that. Yes. That's just add another word in front of fissure, and you got it. And they couldn't approach it, right? It was like this burning kind of sucking thing, and they couldn't get anywhere near it. And then on August 30th, so 2 weeks later, there was another earthquake, and the whole thing was sucked in.
Okay, is there alien investigators?
It sounds like that, right?
No, but do alien experts talk about this thing?
I've never. I mean,
alien abductions.
Until I
know about Ashely, Kansas. That's when the big alien, whatever.
You would think that once again, you would think that this would be a 1952. That's not long ago. It's 70 years ago, right? This is something that we would know about. This would be something that would be in history books.
You would know about
something
it. Yeah.
Right. This would be something that something that didn't exist before. What did I say? 2015. 2015. That it would appear in episodes of things like The Twilight Zone or The X-Files.
Yeah, it sounds like a movie that I've never seen.
Nope.
But
because there's no record that Ashely ever existed. Right?
Yeah, it sounds
just like Urkhammer, there's no record that it ever happened. Now, people say that's because whatever it was, there would have been such a public commotion to think that an entire city, 600 people, could just vanish, right? And think of the religious implications if this was real.
Yeah.
Fires from the sky, the Pied Piper coming to take your kids, who then kind of come back.
Maybe people just can't handle it, so they shut it out.
Except for the fact that there's no record in the Hayes Police Department of anything.
We can't explain this.
Completely.
If we don't want you to know, we're gonna get rid of everything.
Which is fine, right? If you think of okay, so maybe the town covered it up to that. But then you've got there was no earthquake in Kansas in 1952 at all.
No,
right?
Covered it
in
all up.
April, there was a small earthquake in Oklahoma. It was the only earthquake in the Midwest and that area the entire year.
And
it was no way felt in Kansas whatsoever.
I feel like they covered it up.
You feel like that when they covered it up? So you feel like when this whole story was posted by Coaster Kid. that was a credible enough source to like totally go against everything, and that's totally got to be the government.
Well, like you said, like in some of it's real. Some part of it is real. Just how much and what part.
If it's not real, then it should be, right? If it's not real, there's a reason why we're perpetuating the story. Like that idea of the rapture coming, right? And that, like obviously if it came down to in Miami or Tampa or Boston, like these are places where there would be immediate coverage, there would be all this stuff, but we don't know what's happening on those flyover states, right? Mm-hmm. We don't know what happens on those long stretches of road through the desert. In the 1950s too, right? Like in 70 years ago too. That this kind of, don't you know that this kind of stuff happened? It just could be like a small town can disappear. Imagine the panic, because if that can go, then the next town can go. If the next town can go, it can eventually make its way to a major city.
All those conspiracy theories about aliens, though, like if it had anything to do with aliens.
Right, and you keep bringing up the alien part of it, which is not even on my register. But it's like, like if that were confirmation that aliens, right? Because it is coming, everything is coming from the sky. They keep saying from the sky and fire from the sky as well. That it might just be, but like I said, the motto in that no sleep post room, that no sleep Reddit, is while you're here, everything is real. There's something interesting that happens here, and I'm going to get to it after we do the next one, just because the same thing happens in both the stories. Because the next one is Doveland, Wisconsin.
Oh, yay.